California is the most economically unequal state in the country. You can blame some of this on some of their various regulatory structures. So we all talk about Silicon Valley being the employment base that really matters, and it is. But the regulatory heft has now reached the point that there are no startups in California because they can't afford to operate in California. So usually what happens is they'll start somewhere else. Silicon Valley agents will go out, scout them out, and then just buy them and move their populations entirely to Silicon Valley to be folded into a major company. So you just don't see that forest, that ecosystem of startups that you're used to. And that is really, really exacerbating the inequality issue. It's driven up prices because when you pay several $1 million to buy up a college student startup, that college student comes to California already being a millionaire, and all of his employees are all of a sudden already earning 6 digits, and they can afford to bid up house prices. So the homeless problem that we have in California, for the most part, is because people on the lower end of the income scale have simply been priced out of having homes. That has not yet generated a social crisis in California, but if this keeps up, it will. So that's problem one. Problem two is geographic. The California cities have expanded to almost their maximum iteration now, and their only option is to build up. Now, that's less true for, say, LA as it is for San Diego or San Francisco, but that has generated rents and property prices that are just extreme. And in San Francisco, where you've got vertical limits on how high you can build, it's become worse and worse and worse. So that's problem two. Problem three is international. Because most of California's value added happens in the services and the tech sector and not in manufacturing, they are the state that is most dependent upon international supply chains in order to operate. Because of the regulations on energy and environmental concerns, they are the state that is most dependent on foreign oil in order to operate. So they have become the state most exposed to every problem in the international system, which means with the Americans losing interest in that system, California is the state that has the furthest to fall when this system breaks. So right now, for example, the iPhone is built in 1,200 different facilities in 50 different countries. California, Apple, is dependent upon that network.
Right.
What happens when global trade breaks down? They've got to find a way to retool their entire system to deal with maybe 10% the number of facilities they have right now. That is going to be a hell of an adjustment to make. Now, Seattle has two reasons that it has that situation. Number one, it's one of those gateway cities for capital flight. So you get a bunch of price insensitive investors coming up and buying whatever they can. So number one, you got price insensitive purchasers. Second, it's a land issue. It's a geography issue.
Right.
Seattle, the city of Seattle is on an isthmus. They can only expand up and down the isthmus, and they've pretty much reached all the way to Tacoma and are reaching up towards the border. There's nowhere else to go. So if you can't build, you have to increase your price, and that squeezes everybody out. To a certain degree, that's what's going on in Manhattan. Can you imagine what Manhattan would be if Brooklyn wasn't there? There's just nowhere for the prices to go but up. On the flip side, this is probably more sustainable than what is going on in California. The inequality issue is not nearly as bad. There are a lot of other areas in Washington that you can go that look interesting, and you have near captive companies like Google and Boeing who have so much money and industrial plants sunk into the metro region that they're not even going to consider moving. That doesn't mean they're always going to be easy to deal with. When the Seattle City Council tried to put a tax into place to generate more affordable housing, Seattle basically said, we will never add another job in Seattle again if you do this.
Right.
So there's a tension, and that is unavoidable, but it's a much better situation than California is finding itself in, because Seattle, Washington, they're not nearly as integrated into global supply chains as the Silicon Valley region is. Hawaii, you got to remember, it's got a small population. Half of them live in one city. And that one city basically has one east-west road that everybody has to live on. I mean, when your island is a part of a collapsed volcanic cone, you can't really go up. And so everybody's concentrated in this one tiny, tiny little footprint. So, of course, you're going to have price appreciation. Of course, you're going to have horrible traffic. And because it's the first stop for the Japanese come to the United States, of course, you're going to have a lot of foreign capital flight that goes into it. As long as the world is scared and or as long as Japan has money to burn, property prices in Honolulu are going to be strong and rising. I don't think it's ever going to come down. You move outside of Honolulu, and you don't have a single market. You've got dozens, almost hundreds of markets on the edges of all of these islands that trade on their own mechanics. But the fact remains that all the flat land that is near the coast that people want to live on has already been built on. And so if you want to build there, you have to buy a pre-existing property, level it, and start over. And the regulations for that are a thicket that varies not just island by island and town by town, but oftentimes block by block. I just keep in mind that now that NAFTA has been renegotiated, the biggest question mark that was hovering over the Mexican economy has been resolved. And I don't think that ratification of NAFTA is going to face meaningful conflict in Congress. I think it'll be ratified this year. So the glide path or the flight path for the Mexican system looks pretty robust. And anyone who's integrated into that, it looks like they're going to do very well. Texas is the state, of course, that's going to benefit that most from that. The Great Plains state and the states of the I-35 corridor are second in line. And that is probably the part of the country that I think is going to be most interesting from an economic growth point of view moving forward. The website's www.zeihan.com, and the Twitter handle is @PeterZeihan.com.
Besides getting on his newsletter list, he's someone you should consider as having a speaker at your event, since he can talk to so many things and just understand how everything overlaps, whether that's demography or energy or politics or economics or technology or security. And he's really going to help you and your audience prepare for an uncertain future. Peter Zeihan, it's been a real honor having you back on the show. Yeah, great stuff from Peter as always. Well, did we not get to talk about the city where you live or invest? Do you just kind of wish this episode would continue? Well, the good news is that there are a couple ways for you to scratch that itch. Peter was on with us last week, and he was also here earlier, a couple years ago, on both Get Rich Education episodes 101 and 114. The other way to learn more and immerse yourself in the world of Peter is again at zeihan.com. You might want to hire him as a speaker to go big picture at your real estate investing or other event. Next week here on the show, there is no guest. It's just going to be you and I as we get up close and personal with your real estate portfolio. How do you grow it, and how do you get financially free faster? Well, the good news about next week is that you're going to learn that chances are you're one of the hundreds of millions of people that already has money, and a substantial amount of your own money that you didn't even know that you had. That material fires me up. I can't wait to talk about it with you next week. Big thanks to Peter Zeihan today. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. It's been my honor to bring you How America Works here on